Welcome to the Rational Optimist Podcast. Big news. The lawsuit against the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is gaining steam. This is a promising lawsuit. Valor Atomics, which we visited last week, has joined Texas, Utah, Louisiana, Florida, Arizona, and several other nuclear companies to sue the federal government to take back some ability to develop nuclear technology.
You got to take the fight to the bureaucrats, right? I mean, my friend Eli Dorado at the Abundance Institute, he told me about this lawsuit almost a year ago at this stage. And then on December 30th last year, Texas and Utah, along with Last Energy, whose CEO I met in San Francisco last year, they basically filed, as you said, a lawsuit against the NRC. And the core of the lawsuit is essentially that it challenges the NRC's regulatory approach to regulating small modular reactors. Those, you think about nuclear power plants today, huge, massive structures, right? And there's only, I think there's 96 or 92 dotted across America. The future of nuclear is these small modular reactors where you have, a nuclear reactor that can fit inside your garage, but powerful enough to power your whole city or your whole town. Essentially, the legal basis is, hey, when you go back and look at the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, the act is basically regulates new companies or reactors that are huge, right? The ones that we know so well. They are not updated for the current paradigm of where nuclear is going. So this challenges it and tries to essentially have carve-outs for these new small modular reactor companies.
So the federal government was overly regulating nuclear before 1954. And that act, the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, Congress deliberately tried to carve out sections where the federal government would not require licenses to operate certain types of nuclear reactors that didn't impact, I think it was national defense or like energy security or something like that. And it didn't work. The federal government, Eli has shared a stat that there's still the NRC, there's no operating plants for which the NRC has licensed since it came into existence. It is just a roadblock of all roadblocks. Nothing has happened in nuclear since NRC came into existence.
Yeah, my favorite it's kind of like statistics that are true but sound absolutely ridiculous. You hear them and like, there's no way that could be true. So NRC, set up in 1974, 75, it's approved 0 new reactor designs since then. It's basically, I don't know, we should rename it. It's like the nuclear, come up with a good name. It's the Nuclear Denial Commission or something like that. It's just, hey, our job is to essentially say no to everything. You could kind of think about it. You could just have one person work at the NRC. It could just be like, new application comes in, like, no. And look, I'm all for safety, but we've clearly taken it too far. There was a stat in the lawsuit that if an airliner hit Last Energy small modular reactor, it would give off as much as radiation as 100 bananas. Again, just speaks to the fact that old world, these big, huge nuclear reactors, which nuclear is still the safest energy source. We know that, but these new small modular reactors just even more safe.
Yeah, we always have to repeat the initial context just in case there's new listeners. Nuclear is safe, abundant, clean, produces no carbon. There is absolutely no good reason why we don't have a lot more nuclear than we already do. China's building 12 reactors. The United States is building 0. It's a no-brainer for us to embrace nuclear technology. So we were in El Segundo last week meeting with a lot of companies, and one of them was Valor Atomics. And we got to go inside their small modular reactor. It was really cool, really promising. The founder is forced to build and test the first one that he's going to turn on in the Philippines rather than in the US because of regulations. It's just such a shame. These regulations are driving the innovators out of our country, literally. He was an extremely patriotic guy. They had the biggest American flag I've ever seen in my life on their wall, and they're making him leave the country to do his thing.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, he told us the reactor is ready to go, but he couldn't load the uranium into because of regulations. Absolutely insane. Think about how hard it is to design a nuclear reactor, and then a small modular reactor, which there's actually none working in America today. Think about how hard that is. And he told us he essentially spends a huge portion of his time now dealing with regulations and essentially letting bureaucrats trying to beg them to do his thing. And this is personal for him. So his grandfather worked at Oak Ridge National Labs, which was established in 1943, essentially as part of the Manhattan Project. So we're so used these days to nuclear taking 15 years, 12 years to build one reactor. Back in they started construction of this first nuclear reactor. Okay, we know how to build these things for 80 years or whatever. Started construction in February 1943. The reactor was turned on in November of that same year. Need to get back to an America that builds things fast.
And this is 1950s technology we're talking about here. Nuclear is not that complicated. Just think about how far everything else has come in the last 70 years. Nuclear hasn't, because it hasn't been allowed to, but we've known how to do this forever. We're our own roadblock. The lawsuit, an interesting part of the lawsuit is that the plaintiffs say that Texas A&M has a tiny nuclear reactor, a 5-watt nuclear reactor that operates close to the campus, so safe it operates close to the campus. And it's so inconsequential, but it is still regulated by the NRC. They just have blanket regulation over everything, and it's stifling America's energy future.
Yeah, so essentially what the lawsuit gets at is like, hey, NRC, you can still regulate all this big old stuff, but these new nimble small modular reactors, let's try to basically get a new regulatory environment for these guys. And it was pretty cool to see the Ward 1, which was Isaiah and Valor Atomics' first reactor. It had 7 moving parts, and he let us go into the control room. When you think of a control room, I think Chernobyl. I think this big, huge room with loads of buttons, and like you could fit 100 people into it. This more looked like a gaming studio on back of a trailer, right? It was so cool.
Yeah, Homer Simpson in the control room with nuclear waste pouring in the background. It is nothing like that. Nothing like that. So Isaiah or Valor put out a letter. I don't know if Isaiah wrote it. He probably did. Basically explaining why the company is joining the lawsuit against the NRC. And I just want to read the opening to the letter because it's really good. It quotes from the Atomic Energy Act of 1946 that was supposed to, or that tried to put America on a path toward using nuclear for good and not stifling it. So it says, it is hereby declared that the policy of the people of the United States with regards to atomic energy will be directed toward improving the public welfare, increasing the standard of living, strengthening free competition in private enterprise, and promoting world peace. When's the last time you heard anything like that?
Incredible. I there's a chart going on, and maybe we can upload it here in post production. It was essentially the renewables haters, the carbon free haters will say, "Oh my God, we spent all this money developing solar and wind and other renewables, and since 2000, the amount of energy that we get from non-fossil fuel sources, it hasn't budged, or it's up slightly." That's basically because, yeah, sure, solar's gone up lots in a percent term and an absolute term, but nuclear has declined. It was the biggest mistake we've ever made, turning our back on nuclear, and all because of my friend Lewis Anslow, who runs Pessimist Archive. He has this thing that we need to quantify the damage that's kind of not visible, but that regulators do. And the reframe for nuclear is that the nuclear power plant that you don't build is a killer. More nuclear power plants you build, the more lives we save.
And so if this lawsuit is successful, it won't get rid of all nuclear regulation. Instead, a large amount of it will fall to the states. And then certain states, like I'm sure Texas and Florida, will allow innovation and they'll have a great nuclear future. And then probably states like California, New York, and Vermont won't. And we can see in real time an experiment of what happens when you embrace this technology versus what happens when you reject it. I don't know about you, but meeting the people involved in these technologies, like the founders, the builders, the people trying to push it forward. I've always been frustrated by nuclear regulation, but it just like 10x'd my frustration because Isaiah, the founder of Valor Atomics, he's a kid. He's like 25 or something, and he's got 4 kids, which is crazy. But he's so smart and so capable and so driven, and he wastes so much of his time on the phone fighting regulations. It's just such a waste.
Yeah, it's crazy. It really is crazy. And there's so many examples of this, but the good news is that we're finally bringing it to light. We're finally speaking up about it. And listen, once you get a regulation passed, it's very hard to scale it back, but I'm hopeful that this will be targeted enough and smart enough that it can work. And just as you said, it would be amazing to have 50 little mini experiments in America, just like we kind of do with solar today. Who embraces it, who doesn't? California and Texas are very similar in the sense of resources, but Texas is an energy powerhouse, and I think California imports some crazy percent of its energy. That's because Texas is like, hey, you can just build stuff here, whereas California has all these crazy regulations. So let's hope in a year or two we're talking about SMRs popping up everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, at least we're talking about this. At least the world is talking about nuclear regulations being repealed. That's 2 years ago. We were the only people talking about this.
Listen, maybe we should name this show the anti-bureaucrat show, because another topic I want to talk to you about is Joe Lonsdale and 8VC's letter to the FDA. So they basically published a policy piece which talks about biotech innovation, how the FDA is getting in the way. I'll just read one of the opening lines to you. For decades, the United States has led the world on biotech and pharma innovation. American firms dominate the global landscape, representing 6 of the top 10 pharma and 7 of the top 10 medical device companies by market cap. But dominance is now at risk, not from external sabotage, but from our own regulatory sclerosis. Where have I heard that before? It's like biotech and nuclear, it's like exactly the same.
Yeah. Stop me if you heard this before, but we're falling behind China. And, well, no, we're not falling behind China yet in biotech, but they're rapidly catching up. And it's almost solely due to crazy regulations and rules that don't need to be there anymore. So this letter, Joe's name's on it, but he's got a staff of like a scientist at 8VC who made some specific policy recommendations, mostly stuff that should be repealed, that can unleash innovation in biotech and pharma in the US again.
Just before we get in, I think it's important to set the stage here, because it's like, of course, healthcare should be regulated. Of course, biotech should be regulated. Of course, medical devices should be regulated. Absolutely. Again, we're the safety guys here, love safety, but we've clearly gone too far in the wrong direction. So the FDA approval process for new drugs now takes on average 10 to 15 years and costs over $2.5 billion. In 1953, it took 1 to 2 years and cost $40 million, inflation adjusted. The average length of FDA approval documents, back then 3 pages, now over 800 pages. Again, what changed? Not the science, the paperwork. The paperwork is exactly what changed. So now about, I'm sure you love paying your healthcare bills every year, Dan, right? Especially with 2 kids. 1/3 of every dollar you pay in healthcare costs now goes towards administrative expenses. It's crazy.
Yeah. So some of the recommendations they gave to fix this situation are interesting stuff that I didn't know before. Did you know that when a clinical trial happens and their results are not positive, they just often don't get published at all?
It's crazy. I didn't know that. It was a great point.
Especially with AI these days, where the AI can go out there and ingest all the papers ever written and draw conclusions that quickly that it would take humans years to do. Like, knowing this stuff, even if it's a failure, knowing this stuff seems really, really important. So that seems like a slam dunk right there, right?
Yeah, for sure. There was actually, did you hear of the Black Spatula Project?
No.
The Black Spatula Project was this, I might get the details a little bit wrong, but essentially someone published a paper. It's like, those black utensils you have in your kitchen? Yeah, they're actually really dangerous. They're cancerous. Ditch them. Someone fed that. I think it was Ethan Mollick. I think he's at Wharton. He's a great AI follow on Twitter if you don't follow him already. He basically fed the research paper into AI and was like, hey, is this right? Can you pick holes in it? The AI found a miscalculation in the paper that essentially made it like, oh, hey, they're not dangerous at all. And now this Black Spatula Project is a project to feed every science paper, everything ever written, into AI and find similar, essentially, mistakes. Second point I'm going to make on this, Joe and his team in the piece, they make the point of pointing out, like, oh, hey, it's never really been an issue, but now with the rise of China potentially overtaking us. This is a really smart argument that reminds me of something Mark Andreessen said on Rogan, which is essentially there's 2 types of conversations in Washington. You go in one day and you're like, technology is great, and the bureaucrats are saying like, I'm not so sure about this. Let's regulate AI, yada, yada, yada. The second conversation is, China's developing this stuff as well, right? And then it's a completely different conversation. So I think the framing to get anything done with bureaucrats is, China's working on this too.
Speaking of China, so one of the recommendations in the paper is to treat manufacturing done in the U.S. at the same way as manufacturing done in China. So in the U.S., for example, the FDA can show up for an unannounced inspection to a manufacturing facility. It can and often does do that. And when it's in a foreign country like China, they typically give 12 weeks advance notice to manufacturers in China. So naturally, that's a huge advantage to the companies that manufacture in China. And China's got a better safety record in some ways. It looks like it has a better safety record in some ways, but obviously it's because they have time to clean up before the inspectors actually come in. And the article, everyone should read the article if you're interested in this stuff, but the article is just like a dozen of those rules like that maybe made sense at some point when they were first instituted, but don't make any sense right now and are just holding the industry back.
Yeah, obviously you're going to do better on the test if you get 12 weeks to prep for the test, right?
Yeah.
I'll add one on that point about foreign countries. So one thing Argentina has actually done recently is it's basically said, hey, if the US FDA approves a product, it's automatically approved here. And I know some countries also do this with nuclear reactors. And essentially the benefit of that is that if you find a regulator that you really trust, maybe it's Singapore, maybe it's Switzerland, maybe it's Israel, I don't know, and they have gone through the safety standards to approve that drug or that nuclear reactor, you can kind of like say, hey, we can kind of fast track the approval here. I think that's something that the FDA should certainly look at, because again, the drugs that aren't approved cost lives. The healthcare costs, they basically cost people their lives, people time, people money, all that stuff.
Yeah. Another one of their recommendations is to put the most costly aspects of a clinical trial later in the testing process. So they use as an example that reproductive toxicity studies are often required before starting phase 1 trials. So they require you to test it, I guess, make sure it's okay for pregnant women or for fetuses, despite the fact that virtually no early stage trial allows pregnant participants and most exclude anyone not using contraception. So in other words, they're making sure it's like safe in 100% of all scenarios when that scenario is unlikely to happen at all. So move that to the back of the testing process. Maybe you'll make a discovery that can't be used on pregnant women, but can help some other people.
Yeah, on that point, and I think they again mentioned it in the paper, one thing that happened during Operation Warp Speed, which regardless of whether you love the COVID vaccine or hate it, the thing was that you developed the vaccine in record time. One thing that we did during Operation Warp Speed was you essentially ran clinical phase 1, 2, and 3 trials simultaneously. So it kind of sped up everything, which again, I think is something there's just so many little fixes that you can do. What I love about this paper is that they've clearly really gone deep. It's not just like, oh, hey, the FDA is bad. Here's like 12 specific recommendations to speed things up, which is great to see. It's exactly what you need, right?
Yeah. I like Joe's writing. He always ties things back to first principles, which I really appreciate. So 3 first principles that the article concludes with that we should move towards in testing biotech and pharma. One is to make transparency the default. So to make trials and results available so doctors can evaluate them themselves. And it's not just a pharma company or the FDA telling them the results so they can actually see the results. Number 2 is that approval is the default once safety is established. So in other words, instead of them having to prove why they should be able to manufacture this drug, it should be more, you have to prove why you shouldn't be able to manufacture this drug. Right. And then number 3, as part of that, is robust post-approval monitoring. So if you're going to approve drugs faster, you have to keep on top of them because they won't have as long of a track record as if you improve them slower. So I think those 3 things combined would make a huge positive difference in the industry.
I'm super hopeful something changes here. I think there's enough really smart people working on it that something can change. One thing I think is we hit a low point during COVID when the New York hospitals were telling doctors, "Hey, bring in ponchos because we can't manufacture PPE equipment." And again, the article points out that 90% of our, the core medicines are made overseas. So I'm hopeful that something's going to change, and if it does, it's really going to matter for America.
Yes. Should we move on to electronic warfare?
Listen, I'm going to tell you about my new favorite topic, the thing I am absolutely obsessed with right now, which is, as you said, electronic warfare. So we were on a whirlwind tour of San Francisco and El Segundo in LA last week. We got a chance to sit down with Nathan Mintz, the founder of CX2 Industries, which is essentially helping America win on this new invisible battlefield. To quote Nathan, the war in Ukraine is demonstrating that 21st century conflicts will be won or lost in the arena of electronic warfare. Tell me why any of this matters. Can we not just use tanks and planes and snipers to win wars anymore? What's going on?
Well, it starts with the asymmetric cost problem that drones have introduced. So you can, and this does happen a lot in Ukraine, take a cheap drone, send it across enemy lines, strap a grenade to it, and blow up a $10 million tank. And that kind of math is bad for the traditional powers like the United States, who have these big, expensive, fancy, multi-billion-dollar weapons, and they have to use $1 million missile to shoot down like a $500 drone, to use an extreme example. So drones are disrupting warfare. I think everyone roughly knows that already. But guess what? Drones are completely useless if you cannot control them. And electronic warfare is about controlling, detecting, that kind of stuff within a war zone.
Yeah, essentially, the way our lives have become increasingly digital, and you always have your phone on you, and everything is communication networks. It's essentially like that in the battlefield right now. So it's not just drones, but it's precision missiles, and and if you essentially the electronic warfare deals with jamming or knocking out the communications, disrupting them, so that a drone that runs on GPS or a missile that runs on GPS, if it can't do that any longer, the drone literally falls out of the sky, and that precision missile that was meant to hit the guy in that building, it just flies over there instead. So this is like a new invisible battlefield, and you can have all the tanks and drones and fighter jets you want, but if you don't control the communications networks that they run on that invisible battlefield, you're kind of screwed, right? The way I think about this is that the US military has land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. Time to add a sixth domain of warfare, that is electronic warfare.
So Nathan said his vision is for CX2 to create an invisible electronic wall that America controls, that it can push forward or pull back in war. And I don't know, talking to him, it seems like an existential issue. Like this is one of the few areas of war where America is behind. And the current war in Ukraine is probably going to be decided by electronic warfare. Most future wars are probably going to be decided by electronic warfare. So this is truly the most important thing that nobody's talking about yet.
Yeah, essentially for 50 years or more, America has focused on these big, exquisite, expensive systems, right? The problem is in this new kind of what's happening in Ukraine right now and other little skirmishes around the world shows you that it's not those big exquisite systems that win wars. It's the cheap, small, kind of expendable drones and so on and so forth. And it's pretty amazing how the drones and again by extension the electronic warfare and the jamming has just completely allowed Ukraine to punch above its weight. Like should have been overran by Russia, but yet using these modern systems, it's kind of held its own.
Yeah, I think it was in Nathan's article in the Wall Street Journal. He pointed out that Ukraine's offensive, it must have been over a year ago at this point, but Ukraine made a surprisingly effective offensive push into Russia. And it was largely because they were using innovative electronic warfare combined with drones that Russia hadn't seen before, that no one had ever seen before. And Russia wasn't prepared for it. And that's why this much smaller country was able to move into Russia, take some territory. They've lost a bunch of it now since Russia's reacted. It just goes to show how fast everything's moving over there.
Yeah, it's a really a constant game of cat and mouse. So one of the things Nathan told us is that drones in Ukraine. It's funny, I think hardware is becoming software and software is becoming hardware. So the drones, hardware, something physical you can hold, they get over the air software updates 6 times a day. And that's basically, oh, hey, either side comes up with this new tactic. Let's push a software update that vaccinates a whole fleet of drones, not just one, but like thousands of drones against that specific tactic. So this thing is moving at rapid pace. Really, it was you've never seen anything like drones. That was number one. Then we're jamming all the drones. Kat Orman from Flyby, I met her in San Francisco last week. She now told me one of the things going on is signal hopping. So essentially, Ukrainian engineers, they build drones with frequency hoppers that go from, I'm going to get it wrong, but like 6 megahertz to 12 megahertz to 14 megahertz. And it kind of evades jammers. And there's just tons of, it's almost new stuff happening on a weekly basis that you're seeing.
I felt pretty good when we left, having entrepreneurs like Nathan on America's side in this. And Gundo is a place where there's dozens of guys like Nathan who want American technology to be dominant, not just to make money, but to also serve the national interest.
Yeah, I mean, what a change from 2018 when Google employees had a little mini uprising against the company working with the US military. Complete shift for all you investors out there. We are in the early stages of a defense tech bubble. I think it's one of those areas where probably all the money will go to good use in the end, even if the companies don't survive, because we'll get good products out of it. Both defense and commercial. But yeah, it's certainly, I think, one of the hottest areas for the market over the next decade.
Early stages of a defense tech bubble. You think like we have several years left? I feel like people outside of our circles don't even know about this yet.
I think it's a decade-long zeitgeist, so not to geek out on you too much, Dan, but we have that chart of the top 10 companies by decade, and the theme of the companies changes every single decade, right? So not to go through it, people can look it up out there, but I think the next dominant theme is defense technology, aerospace, military innovation. If I asked you what the most valuable private company in the world today is, you would say
SpaceX.
And I think that's only the very beginning. Palantir, first defense company to be introduced into the S&P 500 in 46 years, I believe. Palantir, until recently, had a market cap higher than 3 of the largest 5 primes. Anduril is next, and I think a lot of the companies that we met with last week and will meet with in the future, those guys are going to be multi-billion-dollar companies, maybe trillion-dollar companies.
All right, you got a dose of optimism for us today?
I mix it up a little bit. I've got a innovation of the week for you. You ready to hear it?
Yeah.
All right. The world's smallest pacemaker fits in a syringe and is activated by light. So I'll show you a picture of it here. Engineers at Illinois Northwestern University, they developed the tiniest pacemaker you'll ever see. It's 7 times smaller than a regular pacemaker, dwarfed by a grain of rice, and it can be injected into newborn babies that have congenital heart diseases for temporary or long-term use. And again, about 1 in every 100 children are born with such defects. So potentially a lifesaver for a lot of little ones. And since there's no surgery involved in installing or removing the pacemaker, there's no risk of infections or internal bleeding in the procedures. Long innovation. This is so cool. Just look at that picture of that thing. It looks like a microchip or something. It's pretty incredible. So go the engineers at Illinois Northwestern University. Amazing.
That's awesome. My grandpa had a pacemaker, and it was like the size of a credit card, and you could see it under his skin.
That's funny.
Yeah.
You know, I think you told me they used to make nuclear pacemakers. That's how safe nuclear energy is, folks. You can literally put it in your heart.
Viewers, you can boost our optimism by hitting the subscribe button, ringing that bell, and leaving us a comment. This greatly helps our channel grow. We appreciate all of your support.